vocations have included attorney, university lecturer, journalist, and writer, not necessarily in that order. I am from the United States, and I have come here many years ago hoping to participate in the Israeli dream. I am going to read the beginning of a short story, the first few pages of a short story I've written. It's called Homecoming on Riverside. As soon as Henny spied her dead grandparents climbing out of the taxi, she raced across the side street and down the block towards her building. The yellow cab had just pulled up in front of her building's canopy. With her sharp child's eyes, she recognized them at once, from 2 blocks away and through the heavy snow. The doorman rushed over to the curb. He popped open an oversized black umbrella high over the gray heads of her grandparents, protecting them from the wet snowflakes. The doorman's gestures lost their flourish when he saw the couple's old-fashioned appearance. Grandpa's double-breasted suit, Grandma's chignon. There was Grandpa, bent slightly at the waist, standing aside to let Grandma go in first. Henny ran into the wind, her breath stabbed between her ribs as she raced down the deserted pavement. Through the corner of her eyes she read, don't walk, flashing blood red. The hard plastic handle of her book bag banged against her knees. Icy pinpricks hit her hot cheeks, melted, and ran down beneath her collar. Her grandparents would be bewildered by the lobby's twisting corridors and multiple elevators, the front elevator, the rear elevator, the service car. She could almost hear them shrugging, struggling to ask, did they have the right address? Did their son Ignaz Kanovitz live there? They wouldn't know to use the new name. They would know that their son Ignaz had become Eugene, and that Kanovitch was reborn as Cain. If she didn't get there right now to steer them, the doorman would turn them away, out into the snow, and this time he wouldn't shield them with the umbrella. Henny wondered if they had a place to stay in New York, if they knew anybody. They would have come all this way for nothing, all the way across the years. They wouldn't know how close they had come to seeing their son again, and his wife, whom they remembered so young, and to meeting her, Henny, their only grandchild. She had to make it. This time she would catch them for sure. 83rd Street, 82nd Street. She ran, panting. She was almost there. I'll take you upstairs, she'd shout. I know who you want. For once, there would be no empty chairs in the living room. She hoped they would understand her, that they could speak English, at least a little. There would be time later for them to learn more. Henny would be there to help. Henny raced past the building next door, pushing her way between a couple, walking from the doorway towards the open door of a taxi on the road. She felt their disapproved stares at her rudeness as she brushed past. She saw Grandma go into her building and then Grandpa's thin frame disappear after her into the open doorway. The doorman in his maroon woolen uniform tipped the visor of his cap towards Henny, and he smiled his gold-toothed smile as she dashed in, breathless from the darkened street, intent on catching up. But it was the same story again today. The elevator doors snapped shut just as she arrived to slip in and join them. She hit the buzzer over and over, but it was too late. The elevator whirred. The chains creaked as the car ascended. What's using such a rush for, little missy? That hungry for your dinner, are yous? The doorman asked her in the hearty voice he turned on for the tenants and their children. Henny shook her head in bewilderment and shuffled from foot to foot. She was still breathing hard from the run, and her knee was hurting where her book bag had hit her. The lobby was empty except for the doorman giving a puzzled look. He turned around and stood impassively facing the glass entrance doors, looking out into the boulevard, his thick back turned towards her. Henny's shoulders sagged. She had lost them again. She knew why. She hadn't played by their rules. She hadn't resisted the urge to chase after them. Henny learned to recognize her grandparents from the blurry photographs stashed in the back of her parents' dresser drawer. The photographs she had come across wrapped in wrinkled white tissue paper, held together with crisscrossed rubber bands. She had studied them for so long that she would know them anywhere. And it wasn't only Grandpa and Grandma, it was the other set too, her mother's parents, the ones she called Papa and Nana. Grandpa, Grandma, Papa, Nana. She had given them those names. In Henny's house, grandparents were never mentioned. The doors slid open and the elevator carried Henny upstairs.
To do the transitions, I will introduce Mark Levinson. I didn't introduce Helen, even though I should have.
I introduced myself.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mark Levinson, who has been active in the English writing community in all different ways, comes from Massachusetts and has he says as a day job in a software company. May I introduce you, Mark?
It is true, I've been active in various ways. I just mentioned that 35 years ago I was in the Army, and since I wasn't good for anything else, they made me an English teacher in the Army. Somehow or other I got through it. I managed not to get in trouble with the inspector, who would come around every now and then just to make sure that the soldiers were being taught properly. And that inspector is going to be the next poet you'll hear from.
Okay.
My first poem is called The Ribbon. The lady who handled the carnival till gave you 20 pink chits for your $1 bill. And her wrists knew precisely the length to unreel without counting them off from the countertop reel. She was quick, she was bored, she was unreverential, but what she dispensed was exquisite potential. I read on the newspaper's medical page that in cells, certain molecules shorten with age, that the end is discarded each time the cell splits, just as if you were spending your ribbon of chits. You have only so many before you go broke. You can enter a show full of sequins and smoke, you can spin yourself dizzy, or take a few tries at a challenge that offers the chance of a prize. Now, with your indulgence, I'm going to read a poem by somebody else. This is by a lady called Louisa Carroll, Luiza-Carol, and she lives up in the Coyote. The name of the poem is And Suddenly the Sea. To be a fish as short as a thumbnail, to live a lifetime in an aquarium, to rush your forehead every day into the same transparent walls, to feel all your life followed by an ineffable blue eye, to wait all the time for food from an ineffable hand, not knowing why you were in the aquarium and for how long. And suddenly, the death. And after the death, to be touched for the first time by that hand which has fed you. To be taken out of water with your gills frozen, laid in a matchbox, born on that hand, into the noon light, born on the street and on the beach, and thrown into the sea, which your frail eyes could neither know nor foreknow. during your lifetime. The sea. Your gills could have borne neither its salt nor its tumult during your lifetime. The sea. Back to my own stuff. This poem is called Out. How through trafficked the roadway has become that once led past the orchards to nowhere. Where my street meets it, there is now a sign, high mounted, big as a coffee table, and internally illuminated with bidirectional advertising. It can advertise frozen peas westward, while eastward advertising furniture. But as I turned the corner this midnight, back from too much overtime and email, it was a lightless thing, illegible, throwing a paddle's shadow on the road. I wonder who you phone for sign repairs. It is, after all, still my street corner. I think I'll maybe finish with a poem about reading poetry on an occasion like this. It's called Advice. As we sat with our books and our scribbled-on drafts and awaited our turn on the stage, there was something I know from some decades ago on his topmost page. It was nobly expressed, but bespoke adolescence, whereas he no longer was young. And I made up my mind that it wouldn't be kind to restrain my tongue. So I told him the person composing those verses perhaps should remain on the page. You're the author, all right, but they're wrong to recite at your present age. And the man gave a grunt of unease and affront, and his answer was steady and stern. My age on the page and my age on the stage are my own concern. Then he read, as he'd planned, this ambitious old man with his eyebrows half hiding his glasses, as though daily still facing the foibles and grace of a flock of lasses. He deployed a production of songs of seduction, of Drake and of roguish adventures, and the riveted crowd was not even as loud as his whistling dentures. His ironical words are a tonic, I heard people say, that develops with age. Having never been told that the writing was old, they pronounced it sage. Thank you very much.
Well, I surprised Richard Sherwin by introducing him. and while you're coming up to the podium, we have arranged the podium for tonight to make this a formal occasion. But you can see that everyone here is an incredibly professional poet and with much experience in reading, especially Richard Sherwin, who, as he says, has been teaching as long as I have, or maybe even longer.
Maybe.
But I just want to mention one thing, and that is that all of the writers retain their copyrights.
Whoopee!
Okay, it's all ours.
Okay. Well, you started or you ended with reading a poem about poems, so I figure I'll start with one. This is a poem for the NSA, the National Security Agency, whom I admire enormously. I do, actually. I think finally somebody in America knows what they're supposed to be doing instead of playing their own games. Anyway, this is a poem for NSA. Dear NSA, thanks. Nice to know I got readers of all my poems shot off into cyberspace via my friends' addresses. Sorry for not sending Twitters or Facebooks. I don't know how to use them. I did try Twittering once and lost the haiku poem. If you want to send me critics or such, I'm home most Sabbaths after shul and will gladly read your criticisms on Sunday. Meanwhile, keep up the good work, saving us unread writers from getting lost in the world's violent indifference to artists. In the good old days once, I think the CIA funded a journal that published a poem of mine, but since then, big silence. I think it's great the government steps in to keep us unknowns from time's vanishing act. And who knows but what I'll be footnoted somewhere, sometime, if all the scholars aren't in graves by then, and all books gone to dust, and literate mankind buried in TV. If you got any money left over after sequesterings, I wouldn't mind a check or two. Or maybe you could hack some publishing outfit and slip a few manuscripts of mine into their must-publish or perish list. I mean, who's going to stop you? Anyway, that's my idea of poetry. It's one of the reasons I quit publishing, or trying to publish. I figured there were enough bookstops in the world without using my books for them too. This is a meditation on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. A lot of my poetry's attempts to make sense out of Jewish calendars and the Bible and things like that, make my life have sense in terms of it, and it have sense in terms of my life, and it doesn't always work. Anyway, God made yesterday our jobs today, tomorrow until Messiah. No one knows afterwards how we get on together. As for me, right now is the problem how to breathe life into this poem. Out of all the dead days we've come from chaos to chaos, all the calendars from Boson to Passover, as out of order as the soul they clothe me in, as the words they bear me by. You'll have to tell me when I'm running over time, you know? Okay. This is one called My Father's Son. As I can't say age, I'm aged already, but as I guess finish aging, I realize that all the things I rebelled against, I become, which is a moral somewhere there. Anyway, this is my attempt to try to understand my becoming my father. All my dream life, searching heroes, protecting and teaching me how to protect me and my loves. My father's wins and losses taught me, look at the doings, tune out the speeches. Don't get ground by bosses and unions, millstones grinding workers for food. Truth lies, and truths lie more. Meanwhile, surviving his genes and life passed on to me, a stubborn heart, unforgetting God's and man's betrayals, unforgiving allies failed, wrestling Israel from nightmare angels. Such my light and such my darknesses, holding the borders against the terrors, dusk sneaks in, and dawn can barely stop. Duty met, our lives protecting laws, protecting Jews, honor the only hero taught. And let's see, yes, the last one. This is about Moses smashing the tablets. Well, I always thought Moses had a bad temper, but then nobody in the Bible's a God. We're only humans, even the best of us and the best of him. So it's a sort of a critique. All he had to do was hold his temper, sip his Coke, and belch, and then remember what the crowd he's got was really like. There's worse things than a golden calf to fight. Policy is all. As Aaron knew, nip and tuck the rules before you're screwed. So what if holy tablets, white and blue, keep burning in your soul? And what works for Jews, a wife for God, more visible and sexy like the other gods got, and party time when things go wrong and all you've got is deserts, memories of flesh pots, sand, and grime. But no, he had to smash them, plague them, kill, dirge whoever danced outside his will.
Yeah. Thank you. In case you have just tuned in, you're listening to the best of Israeli poetry in English. And Sharon Kessler, who is going to read now, is also a printer and has a press. Fisheye Press. We'll put, I think that's on the website. Fisheye Press, and way up north in Pardes Chana, Sharon.
And the first poem I'm going to read is called Hagiography, New Mexico, and this poem is dedicated to Eileen Spiegler. You can tell they're out of place here, the trees, bleak versions of themselves elsewhere, diminished because there's no room in such blue strictness for their green sucker, and you can tell they'd like to hide, cower before their blue erasure, as if even pale and thirsty green were a shameful evocation of color, a stolen but unnamed fruit. And that is why when blue strips us down, disturbs us to the bones of our mute white habits, prayers sucked out of us like breath in a vacuum, like chlorophyll desiccated, we begin to collect the forbidden things, small carved figurines of thou shalt nots, intricately adorned mirrors in which blue does not reflect, magical trinkets to protect us from old lovers, braced as we always are against the reincarnated storms of their destruction. And it is comforting to know the trees could be our saints, each one intervening for its favorite supplicants. Unrequited love.